everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's really nice to be speaking to a room full of runners because I guess you'll know what I'm talking about. And the title of my talk today is ELS 2900, the Spine and the PTL. And I'll tell you a little bit about my background and running history before this as well, but not too much because some of you will have heard that talk before. So I always show this photo at the start to as an image of what I do as my job. I am a vet. This isn't my standard patient though. This was me. This was me as a final year vet student in South Africa in Kruger National Park, taking a blood sample from the ear of a rhino that was being screened for disease. But during my day-to-day life, I'm actually a cat and dog vet. I work at the university hospital, so I'm a specialist vet, and I specialize in internal medicine. And I also do some research, so currently I'm about 30% clinical work and 70% research. I've just finished a PhD here in the Centre for Regenerative Medicine, and now I'm kind of doing a bit of both. So I'm very lucky. I enjoy my job very much, and I find running a really good balance because my job's quite stressful, so I find that running is the perfect antidote to that. So that's all I'll say about work. I live with my husband Conrad, our daughter Rowan, and our dog Moss, about 30 minutes south of Edinburgh, just sort of on the edge of the borders. So it's by Gladhouse Reservoir. So any swimmers amongst you will probably know it. It's a fantastic place to go and do outdoor swimming, and it's also a great place in terms of hill running. We live near it's sort of 10 minutes from the foot of the Moorfoot Hills, so I have ideal training ground to run around on. So just to explain how I got into running in the first place, these are some pictures of me as a baby, and my parents were actually carrying me across the Andes on their backs. So the picture on the left there, my mum always gets a bit nervous when she looks back at this picture and thinks they were rather irresponsible. I don't look too bothered, do I, at the picture? So this is kind of, I guess, my roots. So my parents are quite outdoorsy people. They're not runners, although actually both of them are now becoming runners. But yeah, so they're not. They were. But we did lots of hiking in the mountains and wild camping from a very early age, actually. And so that's a picture of me on the hills in the Peak District. So I grew up sort of about in a place called Hadfield, which is on the edge of the Peak District. And it's a real sort of mecca, that area, for fell running. So although I wasn't a fell runner at this time, it was probably in my blood from a very early age. Now this talk was supposed to be given by me and my husband Conrad. So I have some pictures of him as well. He's not here, so he's not been able to censor any of these photos, which is great. But I just wanted to explain that I guess we both have that background, that outdoorsy background. And he really, I think, was showing from a very early age that he was had sort of a talent and an interest in climbing. So there's all the photos I could find of him as a small child. He was either in the far distance with a rucksack, so you could hardly see him. So I didn't show you those photos, or on a rock somewhere. So as I say, definitely showing signs of being a climber from an early age. So these two photos are actually our daughter, and I just wanted to point out we already have at least one picture of us crossing a river with her. And the picture on the left there, she's already showing tendencies towards Conrad's sort of walking off into the distance with her own rucksack. So hopefully she'll also develop a love of the hills, the same as we have ourselves. So going on from sort of childhood, I guess, so as I say, I always hiked in the hills with my parents when I was a child. When we were old enough, me and my brother started going on hiking trips all over Europe, really. And we would typically pack a rucksack for 7 to 10 days. And we would try to aim to go to the wildest places, the places where we would see no one. And we would sort of avoid civilization entirely and wild camp. We had some fantastic adventures, and that really sort of was the core of, I guess, my fell running that sort of stemmed from that. And I learnt a lot, and I feel that those experiences have made me as a person to a large extent, and they're very much, I still find a lot of satisfaction and joy in just going hiking in the mountains. that's me and my brother on the left there. And around the same time, Conrad was really getting into alpine climbing, and that's a picture from the Sands Nom Ridge, wherever that is in the Alps, in 2006. So we were slightly different trajectories at this point, and then we came together in Carnethy. So I started running when I left university, and initially at that point I was working in the Peak District as a small animal vet, and a colleague suggested I go along to a local fell race. I did, I loved it, and I joined a local club called Gossipdale Harriers. And then I went and I was working in the US after that for a year, and unfortunately I couldn't do much running there, but when I came back I moved to Edinburgh, and that's when I joined Carnethy. So this is me at pretty early days in Carnethy, and this was the Two Breweries Hill race, and that's Conrad on the left there. And I guess we met at one of those long distance races, and the picture on the left there is, I think the first year we were sort of together, I guess, at the Pentland skyline, and that's how it ended up. The picture on the right, and that's on Jura, which has become a very special place for us. So that's enough of that, and I'm just going to talk about running now. So for those of you, I guess I felt like I needed to explain a little bit about 2016 before I launched into the spine and adventures that followed. So in 2015, I was fortunate and very pleased to win the British Championship. And after that, I sort of turned my focus towards the long-distance hill running challenges that exist in the UK. And the three main ones, for anybody that doesn't know, are the Bob Graham round, the Charlie Ramsey round, and the Paddy Buckley round. Just a quick show of hands, has everybody heard of those rounds and sort of know what they are? It's a nice audience to speak to. So briefly, I decided in 2016 that I wanted to have a crack at these three rounds. And I sort of wanted to see how fast I could run them. I thought that the ladies' records were potentially breakable. But first I wanted to do, at least the Bob Graham, I wanted to do in a kind of low-key purist style with minimal support, and you can't really run a record round in that style. So initially me and Conrad ran it together in winter with just my mum for support at road crossings, and we had a fantastic adventure. It was real winter conditions, the picture up on the left there. And we ran it in 22 and a half hours. And that sort of satisfied that need to kind of do it in that style. And in April that year, I went with a fantastic group of friends, and we had an amazing day, perfect conditions, and ran it in 15 hours and 24 minutes. So at that time, that broke the record and caused a bit of a stir, I guess, in the fell running community. But that was the Bob Graham round. And then I ran the Charlie Ramsey round a couple of months later. Again, we had fantastic support. If you look at the picture on the bottom left there, that's John Gay and Finlay Wild, so you couldn't really ask for a better team to support you back from Furset to Glennevis. And up there on the right is John Ashcroft with me, so he was the overall record holder at the point when I ran the Ramsey round. And again, as you can see, we had absolutely incredible weather. The picture at the top there on the left is sort of at sunrise, and the clouds were the mist was sort of cascading over the 4,000ers on the opposite side of the valley, because I ran at the Moors and the Loch Treig, Munros, and then back along the Grey Corries and the 4,000ers. And finishing off Ben Nevis. So it was a fantastic day, and I did manage to break John's record. The record has since been broken, and so I broke it it was 16 hours and 13 minutes in 2016, and it was broken this summer just gone by S. Tressida in 16 hours and 12 minutes. It was pretty exciting, and I was supporting him on the last leg, so you can imagine what that was like. Just this way, Ez. No, I wasn't. I was cheering him on every step of the way. So yeah, that was fantastic. And then the Paddy Buckley round, which I ran at the end of that year, I was pretty tired, and I think it's only credit to my supporters that we sneaked in under the record on that one, because they really sort of nursed me round. But it was, again, a beautiful day. So that was kind of the three big rounds in 2016, and then I ran the Extreme Sky Running World Championships, so a race called Tromsø in Norway, and then the Glencoe Skyline in Scotland, and so I did okay there. And I ran the UTMB, which was my first 100-mile race that year as well. So that's a quick sort of roundup of what happened in 2016. At the end of that year, I had, I guess, quite a lot of pressure. I felt there was pressure asking. Lots of people were asking me, "You've had such a big year. What are you going to do next? How are you going to top it?" And I remember being asked that question, and I was actually asked that question several times in the spring of 2017. And by then, I kind of smiled to myself and said, "I've got a way." And the way was by having a baby. But the point when I ran the Scottish Islands Peaks race, which was May 2017, very few people knew. Liz Barker, who ran it with me, and John Gay, who were the two runners on our team with me, they knew. But the sailors on my boat didn't know until we got back, and then I told them. So it was, so I ran the Scottish Islands Peaks race at 13 weeks pregnant, and my main concern was being seasick, because I wouldn't be able to take any seasickness tablets. But actually it was really fine, probably because there was not enough wind, and we had a fantastic adventure. So wherever Willie is, thanks for the chat about that. It really is a fantastic race, and if you can get out there to support or to run it, I would really encourage it. It's a great sort of atmosphere and a real adventure. So I carried on running when I was pregnant, and this is me, I think around 5.5 months, just on the Cucketon up and down race, and this is Bob looking nervous that I might overtake him. I do like this photo. And then, as I said, I carried on. I was lucky to have a fairly straightforward pregnancy, so I was able to carry on running essentially all the way through. I ran, I think, 8 kilometres the day that I went into labour with my daughter. So, as I say, I was very lucky. So, a couple of photos. The picture on the left there is taken at I think it was the Rock Mountain Marathon when I was 7 months pregnant. I ran that with my mum, and we did, I think, one of the score classes. But interestingly, one of the main challenges of that weekend was just sleeping in a one-man tent with 2 people and a bump, because that definitely takes up quite a bit of space at that time. And then the picture on the right there is Tinto Hill Race, which I ran 10 days before Rowan was born. And it was just, I sort of felt like, well, it's an out and back race, so if the last person in the race comes back towards me and meets me, then I can just turn around and go down the hill with them. But as it was, I wasn't actually nowhere near the back, so it was although a little bit of me felt a bit sorry for the people that I did overtake, because then
Joanne's never forgiven me.
But I think the marshals at the top of Tinto were pretty glad to see the back of me, because there was sort of talk about the fact that they didn't really want to deliver a baby up there on the summit. So as I say, so I was able to run, as I said, till she was born. And after I had a fairly straightforward birth, and afterwards I was able to start running again, sort of roughly I gently started about 4 weeks after she was born, and then started training properly about 6 weeks afterwards, once I'd had the sort of doctor check that everybody gets. And I ran my first race back about 4.5 months after she was born, and that was the first British counter of 2018, which was in Ireland. And that's a picture of us there on the left, Rowan sporting her Carnethy supporting hat. And it was a good day, because it was really, really misty, which sort of played in my favour. Some people got lost at the front, and I managed to win. So it helps to navigate, you see. So if you're a bit slow, you have more time to navigate. Yeah, so that was a really good start to the season and a good start to the championship. And once Rowan was a bit older and she could go in a running buggy, then I started doing some training with her as well. So typically my days when I was on maternity leave, Conrad would look after her between sort of 6 and 8 a.m. and I would train. And then sometimes I'd be able to double train, because I'd go with a buggy as well. So it was pretty good. This was us actually, I think I did like a local record attempt to the summit and of a mountain and back with the buggy. So that's in our sort of family record book, waiting for the next one to try and beat it. So these photos are taken on the last of the Lamb Mountain Marathons, which was on Harris in 2018, June 2018. So at this point, Rowan was only 6 months old. and she was just starting to be weaned. But obviously at that point, she was still really quite dependent on me for breast milk. So we really wanted to run this mountain marathon because we knew it was going to be a really special one. So we organised for the organiser, Martin Stone, to tell my mum where the midway camp would be. On these mountain marathons, you're not supposed to know where the midway camp is, but she was an outsider, and she was told by the organiser where it would be. And so my mum carried my daughter, Rowan, into the midway camp, and Rowan was there waiting for us when we finished day one of the LAM. We did the score course, so we ran for 7 hours and got to the midway camp, and Rowan was waiting there, complete with midgie net. And she slept there overnight with us, and the next morning my mum carried her back out again, because this camp wasn't accessible by car, it was only accessible by boat or by foot. So I just wanted to include these photos really, partly to say that Rowan is already very involved in everything we do in the hills, but also to point out that I couldn't possibly do what I do now that I have a family without the support of people around me, and that means friends, but it especially means my family, my husband, Conrad, and my mum and dad, so really, really important to being able to do what I do, and I'm very lucky in that respect. So now sort of get on to L's 2,900. Who's heard of this race? Has anyone heard of this race? So, well, that's good, because I can tell you something you don't know then. So the thing is, I think this race is absolutely fantastic. But before you all get too excited, I'm not sure if it's going to be an ongoing feature in the kind of future. Its future is rather uncertain. But I want to tell you about it because it's the best race, I think, that I've ever run. Which I guess means, you know, I guess it depends how much you would like to run the races I run, I guess. But this I would say was my best ever race. And it's a race that's run in Andorra. It crosses basically the way it works is you hike up to a hut, a high mountain refuge type hut. You all have a meal there, you sort of spend the afternoon there, you have another meal, and then at midnight you set off racing. And your aim is to tag the highest 7 peaks in Andorra. It's run in Andorra, if I didn't say that. All of which are over 2,900 metres, which is why it's called L's 2,900. And then get back to, and then you finish at another high mountain hut. So it's run between these two high mountain huts. Now, the race is really low-key, and it's a really small number of people, so there's about 25 teams that do it, of 2 people. So in total, there's about 50 participants. And the reason for that is that the first hut that is only pretty small, so they can only get in, you go for 2 sittings for your lunch and dinner, and there's a maximum sort of number of 25 people that can sit down at once. So it's that sort of a feel to the race. But the route is unmarked, and it's really technical. So a lot of it is sort of like scrambling, like doing the Anakiga Ridge for 24 hours. Your aim is to finish in under 24 hours. And the final section, there's this ridge, which is really very technical. You do have the option of avoiding that. But so it's a pretty exciting race and all. So I'm just going to show you a few pictures. And I guess one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this race is that we actually took Rowan with us to this race. It was in October 2018. So by this point, she was 9, 10 months old. I was still breastfeeding her, and I'd never been apart from her for a night before. So she came to Andorra with us, and again with my mum. And my mum hiked up to that first hut with us. We pitched a tent, and I breastfed Rowan till midnight, and then we set off on the race. And my mum basically in the morning packed up the tent. She had one other person there to help her. She packed up the tent and carried Rowan back down to the valley. They got a car to the next valley and hiked up to the next hut, and Rowan was waiting for me there at the finish. So this is definitely a sort of high mountain baby that's done some pretty. This is a pretty extreme race to be participating in at the age of 10 months, I would say. So these are a few pictures from the race. We both actually had, both Conrad and I ran it with Conrad in a pair. Both of us had a cold at the time, thanks to Rowan. So we found it pretty hard, especially with the altitude. But it was just, you know, this is sort of the later sections where it's particularly rocky, but it's just really quite an incredible race. And this photo of the end, this is us going up to the final summit, and you can see really how exhausted we were at this point. And that's the picture on the left there is actually when we got to the final summit, because our friend was there taking a photograph, and we didn't really even have the energy to set off down. But we did finally get back to the refuge, and that's me being reunited with Rowan, who was by then pretty keen to get some breast milk. So it was a fantastic adventure. So we finished, I think we were 13th team out of the 15 teams that finished, and the sort of the other 12 teams didn't finish. And we ran it in 20 hours and 40 minutes. So it's a pretty big undertaking. The race is 70 kilometers long and about 7,000 meters of ascent. But it's just an incredible adventure, and definitely a sort of real mountaineer's day out. So if you do ever get the chance, that's the one I highly recommend. So just to say what else happened in 2018 then. So after that initial British Championship race in Ireland, I ran the remainder of the British Championship races, and I managed to win the British Championship 9 months after Rowan was born, which I was really proud of in terms of sort of being a mother and coming back. And at the same time, I didn't really feel like I was quite back racing where I had been previously. And part of me really wanted to prove that I could do that again. But it was hard because at this point in time, Rowan, I was back at work, working full time. Rowan wasn't sleeping through the night by any means. In fact, she didn't really do that till she was about 1.5 years old. And the nights were drawing in, so now it was sort of autumn 2018, and I was really struggling to get up at 5 a.m. to train before work. So I did something. I signed up for this race as a kind of motivational thing. So this is I think you probably all know, the Montane Spine Race is a 268-mile long race, which takes place in the middle of January. It's run along the Pennine Way from south to north, so from Edale in the south to Kirkby at home in the north. And it's so the competitors, you have to carry all your own kit, and that includes like a sleeping bag, a shelter, a stove, all your food, lots of clothes. You have to navigate. But crucially, and I think this is a really crucial component, it's a non-stop race. So from the minute you cross the start line on Sunday morning, on that January Sunday morning, to the point when you cross the finish line, you're racing. So sleep is a really tactical thing. So you sleep too much and you'll drop places, and essentially sleep too little and you'll drop out. So it's a real balance. And it was kind of, I guess it was that sort of unknown challenge that really, that was a kind of temptation, you see, because it's really exciting to do a challenge where you don't really know if you can do it. I find that sort of exciting. And whilst I'd always said, when I'd heard about this race previously, that it looks miserable and that I would never do it, when it came to it, probably a part of me was thinking, but could you do it? You know, if you tried, could you do it? So anyway, I ended up signing up, and I got on and tried to do some training. So it did work in terms of motivating me. For the following sort of 3.5 months, I think I signed up in September, end of September. And for that autumn and winter, I trained every day at 5 a.m. So during the week, I trained between an hour and a half, and at weekends, sort of 5 hours roughly, both days. So and even at weekends, I trained at 5 a.m. So that way I felt that I was getting back to spend most of the day with my husband and daughter, and that I didn't really feel that they were sort of missing out on having mum around, and I was getting to spend the time with them. So in terms of my training, firstly, I started training with a pack quite early on. And initially that was just 1 kilo or so, and I built the weight up to about 6 kilos by the time I ran the race. So my race pack was about 5.5 kilos. It was pretty light given everything that we had to carry. I think some people were carrying sort of 15 kilos, and I don't know how that's possible, but yeah. So I trained with a pack. I built up the mileage gradually. So at the start, I think I was running sort of 30, 40 miles a week, and by the end, I was running about 100 miles a week. I was doing like one speed session a week, one hill rep session, and then maybe some fartlek. And by the end, I was doing back-to-back long runs as well, so 2 or 3 days back-to-back. So that's kind of a rough sort of summary of what I did in terms of training. And I ran this Cheviot goat race in December as well. and finished third overall, and felt pretty good actually when I finished, and that was 55 miles, so I sort of felt it was probably on the right track. So now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about sort of the lead up to the race. I would be lying to say that I didn't go into this race wanting to do well. Like I felt like I wanted to try and, I wanted to try and win it, I guess. And we looked at, with Conrad's help, we looked at the splits of previous runners from the year before. The point when these times stop is when these people dropped out that year before. But basically, this is just put here to say that I wondered what, if you just ran it looked to me like the leaders on this race previously, the winners, generally start off pretty fast, sort of 5 miles an hour, but by the end they're struggling to make 3 miles an hour. It seemed to me that it would be more sensible to run a more consistent pace all the way through. And in reality, that's pretty hard to do. But I worked out for a 4-mile pace with reasonable, actually, rest stops that you would finish, if you kept that pace up, you would finish on Wednesday, sort of late afternoon, which in hindsight is kind of interesting to look back now and look at that prediction. But it was by no means me sort of aiming to get a record. It was just looking at kind of pacing strategy at this point. So leading up to the race, I guess I felt that I was pretty well prepared in terms of running. But the thing that I was most worried about was leaving my family, in particular leaving Rowan for what was potentially going to be 4 to 7 days of time alone. And one of the reasons I was worried about this was that she was actually still being breastfed at the time when I ran the race. And my plan had been to wean her before the race, and it just didn't work out, and I didn't want to force it. So in the end, I expressed lots of milk, and that was in the freezer, ready for her, frozen. She stayed in Scotland for the duration of the race. And I just added a breast pump to my drop bag. So for this race, you get your drop bag, there's 5 checkpoints, so they're roughly 50 miles apart, and you get your drop bag at each of those checkpoints so you can resupply. And I knew that I'd be tired, so I included a little laminated card with all the things that I needed to do at the checkpoints. And that included like change your head touch batteries, pick up new food, socks and that sort of thing. And all I did was add the breast pump to the bottom to remind me that I needed to express milk when I got to the checkpoints, just to prevent myself getting mastitis. And in reality, a lot has been made of this, but it really wasn't such a big deal. The first checkpoint, it probably cost me 5-10 minutes. And I was the first checkpoint, the leaders didn't really go inside. They kind of sat in this room outside, this sort of semi-outdoor room, and they ate their meal there. So I did the same, but then I was like eating my meal and pumping milk with the other hand. And I was just like, all kind of like, what's the words, kind of, if you know any sort of anxiety about being seen breast pumping in public, at that point I was like, who cares? I'm not going to let these guys get away because I went off into some room to breast pump. So I was just like, they'll just have to watch if they want. So that was the only checkpoint really where it cost me any time, and it was only 5 or 10 minutes, and I caught them up pretty quickly. And after that, just I guess my milk supply dropped, and it wasn't such a big issue anymore anyway. So day 1 of the race, the year that I ran the Spine, the weather was overall pretty good in the sense that we didn't have deep snow. But what I would say is it was wet and the ground was pretty boggy. So none of the bogs were frozen by any means. And the first day was actually really windy as well. So you can't tell from this photo, but we were running into a strong headwind the whole day, which was sort of energy sapping. So at the first day, there was a group of about 8 of us. But by the evening time, it was just me and the 2 previous winners, Ian Keith, and who's the Irishman, and Eugenie Rosselot. So this is us. This is us actually on the second day now. So we ran through that first night together. I was really glad of their company actually that first night, because in a weird way, I sort of found that first night the hardest. It was just somehow being away from home. I was still sort of 200 miles away from kind of seeing my baby again. I wasn't really fully focused on the race yet, so I was finding it hard to kind of just, come to terms with the fact that I was away from her. But once it got into the second day, I guess once the dawn came on the second day, somehow my mind switched into race mode and things got a lot easier. So this is us, the three of us, now on our sort of final section from Horton in Ribblesdale to Hawes, which is the 100 miles, and it's the second checkpoint in this race. So the three of us were running together, and we got to the second checkpoint, and Ian Keith had just dropped back a little bit. And I ate at the checkpoint, and I set off. And my aim at that point was I kind of wanted to run on my own for a bit. As we'd come into the checkpoint, I'd actually we'd sort of left Ian Keith a little bit behind, and it was just me and Eugenie. And it was an interesting dynamic with Eugenie, I guess. He has a tendency, he's run this race several times before, so I know that he must know the route, and he also must be able to navigate. I think he also proved that later on in the race. But when he's with you, and I know that other runners have found this before, he tends to rely on you somewhat for navigation. And occasionally he does shout out left or right, but he doesn't always get them the right way round. His English isn't that great, so there's also not much chat. Sorry if anybody that didn't mention it, he's Spanish, so yeah. So it was kind of an interesting dynamic, but mainly I guess the thing that maybe sometimes irritated me a little bit was that he'd sort of treated it as if we were running the race together against everyone else. So as we were dropping down into Hawes into the second checkpoint, he said to me, "We go to the supermarket. 1 minute, we go to the supermarket." And I was like, "No, you can go to the supermarket. I'm going to go and pump some breast milk. I'll see you at the checkpoint." So anyway, we got to the checkpoint, and I ate my meal, and I tried to, and I set off, and I guess I was purposefully trying to get away from Eugenie. And I did open up a gap going up that hill, the next hill, which was called Great Shunner Fell. And I was feeling really strong and really good, and I ran up quite a lot of that hill. But unfortunately on the descent then, just as I was dropping away out of sight over the horizon, I saw this little black dot appear on the kind of hill above me, and I knew that he'd spotted me and that he was going to chase. And he did. He must have really gone down there for hell for leather down that last hill. As I sort of reached the valley, I heard this whistle behind me, and he was whistling me like a dog that had got away. And when he caught me up, because I slowed down and I waited, and he caught me up and he was going, "Okay, everything okay? Everything okay?" Yeah, fine. So then we ran on together. I mean, it was nice to have company. It was nice to have someone to kind of share the highs and the lows with. But I had come to this race actually kind of wanting to win it, so it was a kind of an interesting dynamic. So into that third night, then we ran together. So past Tan Hill Inn, which is it's a very cosy, warm pub, and then through the bogs that followed. And finally to checkpoint 3, which was Middleton. And I think this was now about sort of 160 miles into the race. And at this point, we slept for the first time. So this was on the second night, and we both ended up sleeping about 2.25 hours. So this is now on the third day. This is just coming off Crossfell. So on the third day, we were running again together. We were coming off Crossfell, and which is the highest point on the route. I think it's the highest point in Britain outside the Lake District, in England outside the Lake District. And we this is us dropping down to Greg's Hut, which is well known on this race. Often there's somebody in there making noodles, and unfortunately they weren't there when we were running the race, which I feel is a great regret. It's one of my great regrets about my particular experience of the Spine is the lack of noodles at Greg's Hut. But so we carried on. This is us dropping now down into the valley towards Alston, which is the 4th checkpoint in the race. So, and this is us just coming into that 4th checkpoint. Now, when we reached this checkpoint, we both had a meal. They had fantastic lasagna. It was really kind of lasagna to die for. And I was pretty much ready to go. But Eugenie had laid down and was having like a massage. He always had loads of people around him at the checkpoints. He was having like a massage and his feet dealt with. And I think he was struggling because of that fast descent. You see, I think he'd wrecked his thigh muscles a little bit. So he shouldn't have raced so hard to try and catch me on that descent. But anyway, so he was doing that, and I think he fell asleep at that point. And I took the opportunity and I left. this is now going into the third night of the race, as I say, on 2.25 hours sleep. And I really sort of pushed on to use the maximum, to use the daylight I had to make the maximum gap. And the night that followed was really exciting because by the time Eugenie set off an hour and a half later, I had about 7.5 kilometres to 8 kilometres of gap. And there were actually people periodically along the course, because this was sort of the section to Greenhead and Hadrian's Wall, and there were people that were coming and telling us what the gap was between us. So it felt pretty exciting as it can be at that point in a kind of ultra race. And yeah, so there was this one particular person, Mark Haywood, and he took lots of nice photographs as well, and these were his photographs of kind of that section. And so I got his. Yeah, so I think that's another beautiful one of his. And this is going into the night, so I've got quite a bit to say about this night, I guess. So firstly, it was getting increasingly hard to stay awake. And so to keep myself awake, I was doing things like I was singing out loud, and I was trying to remember the words of songs to the Spice Girls from when I was like sort of a young teenager. And I was also sort of talking to myself to try and keep myself awake. And I started to sort of see things. So initially it was just like, you know, a cobweb covered in dew sort of jumped out at you as this kind of silver shape. But actually by the next day I was seeing things moving all around me and seeing animals in everything I looked at. So for example, on the last day when I was running along the Pennine Way, the stone slabs that I was running over, I could see like horses and nuns in the slabs. And then I saw a pig in the heather, and I saw a tree doing yoga at one point. It was like doing the dog down position of yoga. And then it sort of, that same tree changed then, and it became a deer and sort of a stag that was trying to scrape off its antlers off the wall. So it was really bizarre. And sort of falling asleep as well on my feet, sort of having these micro sleeps and then waking up and with a sort of this disorientation, trying to work out where I was, and then realizing I was running a race, and then I would panic thinking I'd got lost in the time that I'd been asleep. So it was a really bizarre final night, I guess. So I'm going to show a little bit of video now. Hopefully it'll work. What I would say is that where this video starts then is at the 5th checkpoint. So about 3 a.m. On this third night, I think it was 3 or 4 a.m., I arrived at the final checkpoint. And by this point, as I say, I'd only had 2.25 hours sleep. And I really needed to sleep, but I also felt that if I did so, then Eugenie would find me at the checkpoint. And I felt that if he attached himself to me again, I would just really not be able to drop him. So I lay down for sort of 30 minutes for a power nap, and then I got up and I left. And that was a really hard thing to do. It was also a kind of a gamble, because I still had sort of 50 miles of the most remote kind of section on the spine to do, and it was getting colder. But at the same time, I felt that it was a risk I could take, and in the end it worked out okay. But this video then is taken from the point that Eugenie, and it takes you to the end. It's taken from the point that Eugenie and I were at that, or I was at that final checkpoint till the end. So let's hope it works.
That must be a big motivator.
Yeah. It is. You don't have to clap. You don't have to clap. Thanks. Yeah, you don't need to clap. So yeah, it was funny actually, that final bit of video there showing me at the finish line, because I was obviously really excited to see Conrad and Rowan. But when Rowan got handed to me, there was this moment where I wasn't really sure if she was gonna accept me, or if she was gonna start to cry, because she looked a bit, you can see she looks a bit dubious. I think Mummy was wearing this black hood and hat and smelt pretty bad. But once I'd had a shower, then she sort of she seemed to be happier then that I'd come back. So that was the spine race. Overall, I guess it was a fantastic experience. Lots of people talk about how hard it was. It was hard, but at the same time, I genuinely love running, and I love being in the hills, and I love kind of outdoor adventures, and it was a great challenge. So I've done things that I found harder than the spine in that sense, because it was just genuinely, a lot of it was very enjoyable. It was a real adventure. And I guess the final comment would be kind of leaving the spine behind. There's been there was a kind of a whirlwind, a media kind of whirlwind after the spine, which I found at times overwhelming. But at the same time, I have received a lot of messages from people telling me that they've been inspired by kind of my story, and that in itself has been tremendous for me to kind of hear, and I've been inspired by their stories. And I feel very privileged to be in a position where I can potentially inspire people and make a difference to people's lives. And I think it's good that we're having a chat about women in sport and breastfeeding and those kind of subjects. So overall, yeah, I'm very proud, and I feel very fortunate with the way things worked out. So quickly, I'll just tell you about the rest of 2019 then, just to finish. So in April, we skied from Chamonix to Zermatt in 4 days. We skied from La Tour, actually, and so we skied the haute routes. And we were really lucky, actually, because it was maybe it was March, it was the very start of the season. And but I think it snowed a lot on the first day, and so all the kind of people that had been planning to set off didn't set off, and we were alone in two of the huts we slept in. We were the only people there, so I think that's kind of unheard of. We had a fantastic adventure, and I guess what I'm trying to say about ski touring is that this is a thing that I've only come into the last couple of years, but I found it really sort of liberating, a fantastic way of kind of extending my summer mountain adventures into winter, and it's definitely something I'd like to do more of. So there's just another picture of ski touring there in last year. And then to sort of finish, I'm going to chat a little bit about the PTL. So this was the kind of other big race that we ran in 2019. So this is the Petit Trot à Lyon. You'll have heard of this maybe previously in talks by Ollie and Graham maybe, and I'm sure they do it much more justice than I will ever be able to do. So I'll just kind of give you a brief resume. But this is the longest race, although it's not technically a race, but it is a race, in the UTMB series. So if anyone tells you the UTMB is the big one, it's not. The PTL is the big one. And it's roughly 300 kilometers and about 24,000 meters of ascent. So probably only sort of twice a UTMB, but those statistics don't really do it justice because it's completely different than the UTMB. The terrain is very different. A lot of it's on very small trods, kind of wilder paths. It goes through areas that aren't so well traversed. Some of it's not on paths at all, and it's much more technical. So you have to carry a harness and a helmet. We had to carry a harness, helmet, crampons, and it was a real adventure. So you run it in teams of 2 or 3, and I ran it with Conrad, my husband, and Jim Mann. So it was a great team. The race starts and finishes in Chamonix, and it goes through Italy, Switzerland, and France, and in a kind of circular route, and it obviously goes around Mont Blanc. So when this is us ready to set off on our, I think we were Team Carnethy, I think. We're ready to set off on our PTL adventure. And this photo's here just to remind you, remind me to tell you that this is a race I'd been wanting to do for several years, actually. And in fact, it was the reason that I ran the UTMB in 2016, kind of wanting to get a kind of entry at that point. And the reason I wanted to do it was I was inspired by Ollie's talk, I think, about it. And he was so right to inspire me, and I'm very grateful for it. But given how long this race had been in the planning, we weren't very well prepared when we turned up at the start line. Me, because of sort of injury and working on a thesis over the summer and having a small child. And none of us had any altitude acclimatization, but at least Conrad and I had bought some food beforehand, whereas Jim, when we turned up in Chamonix on Sunday afternoon, had no food whatsoever. So a lot of his supplies were purchased in the bakery on Sunday afternoon, so you can imagine the sort of what went into his race nutrition. Also a lot of my food he was scavenging from me. So that was kind of that was a degree of our preparation. The race. The most runnable bit of this race was the first 10 kilometers down to Les Houches, and that was the only bit where I can really say we properly ran, I think, in this race. The rest of it, there was a lot of hiking. There's several sections. This is just, for example, this is one of the sections leading up to kind of, I think there was chains and things above this. This was the first climb. This was a climb out of the Chamonix Valley, and already we were onto chains and ladders, and that was, I guess, a portent of what was to come, and it did continue in that style. So big climbs, sort of standardly sort of 1,500 meter climbs, and it felt like you were always going either up or down, and never really doing much flat. This is the afternoon on the first day when Conrad sort of had a bit of a wobble in the heat. We were actually pretty near the front, and then we slowed down. So I encouraged him to get in the water, which he wasn't that keen on. But I loved it because I'm out there in the middle of the lake swimming around. So we had a brief stop for a swim at that point. And then I'm probably not going to be able to tell you a day by day, so I'll probably just tell you the most exciting bits. This picture's here just to show you the kind of terrain that we were crossing. So that was fairly standard, and you can imagine you can't really run on that sort of terrain very well. And there was quite a bit of sort of scrambly ridge walking as well. Jim's not that keen on technical stuff, so these were the bits where we had to sort of nurse him along. But he was probably the fittest of the three of us. So when we were going up an easy track, then he was way ahead. So it worked out both ways like that. And this is a glacier that we crossed. So we crossed this glacier. We had crampons in our bag, as I say. So we were just able to cross this glacier. There was a section on this glacier that was marked out with flags for you to avoid the crevasses. And there was one section where they actually had somebody with a rope, and you put your harness on and you sort of traverse that section, I guess, because they felt that there was a high risk of you falling into something on that particular section. I'm glad that we did this section in the light, because I think it was a fantastic view to see. Crossing the glacier was really easy, actually. It was the section afterwards on the kind of moraine where all the rocks were that took forever, and that was really, really slow going on that section. There's just one of Jim there. Just to kind of describe our strategy, we slept every night for roughly 2 hours. That's kind of what we did. We slept in 2-hour breaks. And you sleep in refuges along the way, so there's certain huts marked out where you can sleep. This race has an incredible atmosphere. As I say, it's not really a race, it's kind of a bit less, there's not the same sort of hype that you get with the UTMB, and as I say, it goes through kind of wilder places, but the volunteers are absolutely fantastic at the huts. It's hard to describe, but you arrive at the hut, one of these huts in the middle of the night, you're totally sleep deprived. And I remember one hut that we went into, and it was like they were having a party there at 3 a.m. And maybe they were, and I could swear that they were heating up their shots, like alcohol shots in the stove, which I don't think that's possible, but like that's kind of my recollection. And all of the runners' shoes, they were like, take off your shoes, and then they were like arranging them all around the fire to dry while you were like having your beef stew and your vanilla custard or whatever. And then they'd wake you, they'd ask you what time you wanted to be woken, and just above and beyond, the volunteers are absolutely fantastic. And that's the way the whole race felt the whole kind of adventure. I think it's supposed to be sort of an adventure to bring out the sort of the skills and solidarity and mountain sort of spirit. I think that's the way the PTL describes itself, and I'd say it really does that very well. So this is just to show you the kind of terrain. So this is a path actually here. That's the path. That's the person on the path. So that, and I don't even remember that being particularly like scary. That was an okay bit. So there were some sections where I was questioning whether it was sensible not having a rope in that particular section. There was one particular section we did at night, and there was a couple of rather nervous-looking sort of, you know, race organisers or safety people kind of shepherding you across. And that particular bit did look like there was a massive drop-off down the side, and you sort of slid down the scree, and you hoped that you weren't going to slide too far before you kind of dropped off the edge. And I'm glad that we did that bit and weren't able to see, I guess, what was below. But yeah, so this was kind of one example of just what the terrain was like. And there's a little bit of video. I'm just going to show you this because it actually has bits of us in it. This is the bit when we're crossing the glacier, climbing up to the glacier and crossing it a Russ. And it's just to give you a feel of the scenery because it's really hard to do with static photographs. Yep. Oh, sorry. This is us. It was very Scottish, the summit of this mountain. And this is our team. Oh, sorry, did I cover it? I think that's it. Yeah, so that was all. So it's just a little bit of video to show you from the PTL. And now I guess I'll finish with, this photo was actually taken on the spine, so I don't have any nighttime photos on the PTL, but I wanted to remind myself to tell you a little bit about the kind of nighttime sections. So as you get more sleep deprived, I had the same experience with kind of hallucinations on this race as I did on the spine. But there's a couple of funny incidents. There was this incident on I think it was the third night that we were out, when we were all getting really tired, and at one point I said, Jim, we just need to stop and we need to have a 5-minute power nap. They work pretty well actually, power naps. So me and Conrad sort of lay down, and Jim said, it's all right, I don't need to sleep, I'll watch you, I'll time it. So then at some point, however long later, I woke up and I was like, Jim. He was asleep. How long have we been here? Nobody knew. So we were just like lying there on the mountainside. So that was one example. And there was this other occasion on the final night. So we did this race. We did it in total in 4.5 days. We finished on the Friday afternoon. But on that Thursday night, we probably overstretched ourselves a little bit. When we got to the refuge at the kind of the top of the mountain about 6 o'clock, we decided actually we've got time. We'll go down into the valley and then we'll climb up the other side and get to the next refuge. So a sort of, I don't know, 2,000 meter descent and 2,000 meter ascent again. And at this point, by the time we did get to that next refuge, we'd been running about 26 hours, done about 7,000 meters of ascent. And 70 kilometers, sort of 4 days into the race. It was a pretty big day. But on that final climb, we started climbing, and it was this sort of narrow, steep track in a dense wood. And I was seeing animals all over the place, you know. And I was telling the others, I was like, look at that, and look at that animal. And they were totally uninterested. They were like, they weren't interested in my hallucinations whatsoever. I was falling asleep on my feet, so I was kind of falling. I hadn't been able to sleep the first couple of times I slept, so I guess I'd had less sleep than them. But they were walking along, Jim was walking along behind me, and he said to me at one point, "Oh, for goodness sake, take a Pro Plus or something. It's like following a drunk home." Because I was but then sort of half an hour later, he was much the same, and he was sort of exclaiming over the huge slugs on those mushrooms. Did you see the huge slugs? And then he said he kept looking at his watch, and he would like look, and he, you know, half an hour had passed, and we hadn't moved a single meter in a cent. You know, it was just a really bizarre. I was actually doing the best of all of us at this point. We got out this dense woodland, and kind of it got very bushy and scrubby, and the path became more and more indistinct. And Conrad was leading the way, and Jim had the GPS, and Conrad was saying, "Jim, are we still on the trace?" And Jim was like, yeah, we're still on the trace. And Conrad was like, "Jim, are we still on the trace?" And this happened a few more times. In the end, Conrad was like, "Jim, just give me the Jim, give me the GPS." And Jim gave him the GPS, and Conrad realised that the arrow was sort of the size of France, size of France on this GPS. He zoomed in, and we were sort of a few miles off of where we were supposed to be. And part of me was like, well, at least maybe when we get back onto the track, it'll be better than this. Because by this point, we were, deep, we were sort of chest deep in bracken, and it's dark, so you keep falling into these, these big holes between the rocks. It was a nightmare. But we got onto the path, and it was just the same. It wasn't any better. So anyway, that was the longest 2,000-meter climb I've ever done. We finally reached the ridge and dropped down into the last refuge, and we slept for 2 hours there. And I can honestly say that was the best sleep of my life, because we got our own new room with clean duvets, and there was like feather bed, and it was the definition of your head hit the pillow and you're asleep. It was just incredible. So the next morning was our sort of last day on the PTL. And it was really special, actually. It was a really special last day. We got up at 4, and the refuge was actually shut for breakfast, so we knew that we'd have to sort of climb over three big cols before we reached a refuge for breakfast. So this was us coming up to the second of those cols, and it was just beginning to sort of get light. And it was just one of those mornings, the sunrise was just spectacular. And we met another team that was just in front of us. And we all met on the top of this col, and in the background you can see the Mont Blanc Massif. And somehow the combination of that, it was sort of like that. It was that moment. It was one of those moments in the mountains that you just remember for the rest of your life. It sort of sustains you through the UK winter. This sort of feeling of like awe and kind of the scale of it, and the kind of and that all together with being there with other people that kind of appreciate it as well. And obviously it was the last day of this challenge, and we knew that we'd finish that evening, so that kind of added into it. So it was a very special day. It was a very special moment on the top of that col. And that's just us dropping down there then, and on our way to the finish. And that's us at the finish. We did actually we finished surprisingly strongly on this race. I feel like we were running better by the end than we were at the start, because we'd had like a 4-day altitude training camp. So yeah, we finished pretty strongly, and just in time actually to watch the start of the UTMB. So I think we finished about 4 o'clock, and the UTMB started about 6. So they had this kind of cut-off time that they don't let you finish the PTL for a couple of hours before the UTMB starts, because you might get in the way or something. So, but we were lucky to squeeze in under that, and we had pizzas and beer, and sat out in one of those cafes and watched the UTMB start. So it was pretty special. And that's, I think, all I've got to say. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.